Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, November 1944. The women's detention compound stood silent in the dawn cold, frost whitening the bare ground between wooden barracks. Then a scream tore through the stillness, raw, primal, the sound of something being ripped away. Corporal James Wheeler ran toward the noise, his boots crunching frozen earth, and found 2 guards holding a German woman while a third carried a 6-month-old infant toward the gate. The woman fought against the hands restraining her, screaming words Wheeler didn't understand, but whose meaning was universal. They were taking her baby. And what happened in the next 12 hours would force the entire camp to confront a question no one wanted to answer. Her name was Anna Weber, 32 years old, captured with a group of German medical personnel in France during the Normandy aftermath. She had been a nurse in Wehrmacht field hospitals, following German forces through Poland and Russia before being transferred to France in early 1944. Her husband was a Luftwaffe pilot, shot down over the Channel in 1943. Missing, presumed lost. She received the notification while 7 months pregnant. The baby, a girl she named Elsa, was born in an American military hospital near Cherbourg in July 1944. The birth happened during the chaos of German forces retreating, American forces advancing, whole sections of France transforming from occupied territory to liberated zones. Anna was captured 3 weeks after giving birth, swept up with other medical personnel when her field hospital was overrun. The Americans didn't know what to do with a nursing mother, an infant among POW populations. Regulations covered captured soldiers, civilian detainees, even children accompanying military units. But a baby born after capture? To a mother classified as enemy personnel? The protocols were unclear, the precedents were absent, and the bureaucratic solution was to process the mother as a standard POW while categorizing the infant as something else, a dependent, a non-combatant, a problem requiring specialized handling. They transported Anna and Elsa to Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, a former cavalry post converted into a women's internment facility that held roughly 400 German and Italian women captured in various theaters. The compound was cleaner than male POW camps, the barracks better maintained, the whole operation managed with the assumption that female prisoners required different considerations than male soldiers. But no one had considered what happened when one of those prisoners was actively breastfeeding an infant. The order came from Washington in early November, transmitted through Army administrative channels with the cold efficiency of bureaucratic decision-making. It specified that infants born to POW mothers were to be placed in appropriate civilian care facilities until war's end and repatriation. Procedures could be properly established. The reasoning was clinical. POW camps were not suitable environments for infant development. Medical care for babies required specialized resources. Maintaining proper nutrition and health care for both mother and child created logistical complications. The order made sense from a policy perspective. It made no sense from a human perspective. Colonel Arthur Hayes commanded Fort Oglethorpe with the uncomfortable awareness that his facility was an administrative anomaly, a women's detention camp in a war fought primarily by men, holding prisoners whose presence created constant questions about appropriate treatment and protocols. He received the separation order with deep reluctance, but no clear alternative. Orders were orders. Washington had decided. His job was implementation. He called his senior staff to discuss logistics. "We need to identify mothers with infant children," Hayes said, his voice suggesting distaste for the task. "According to this directive, we're to arrange transfer of the children to civilian care facilities. Social services will handle placement." Captain Margaret Sullivan, head of the camp's medical services, spoke immediately. "That's barbaric. These women are nursing mothers. You can't just remove their infants." "I don't like it either," Hayes said quietly. "But the directive comes from Army Command. I don't have discretion to ignore it." "Then get discretion," Sullivan said, her voice sharp with anger, she rarely displayed. Contact your superiors. Explain the medical implications. Explain that abruptly separating nursing mothers from their infants causes both physical and psychological trauma. Request clarification or delay. I've already tried that, Hayes said. The response was unambiguous. Children are to be removed and placed in civilian care. The mothers will be informed that their children are safe and will be reunited with them after the war. And if the mothers refuse, asked Lieutenant Wilson, the compound security officer. Hayes was silent for a moment. Finally, then we'll have to use whatever force is necessary to comply with the directive. I don't like it, but those are our orders. They came for Elsa at dawn on November 14th, 1944. Anna was feeding the baby in her barrack when Corporal Wheeler and 2 other guards entered with a female social worker from the local welfare department. The social worker was perhaps 50 years old, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and an expression that suggested she had seen too much hardship to spare sympathy for individual cases. Mrs. Weber, the social worker said through an interpreter, we're here to take your daughter into protective custody. She be placed with a local family who can provide appropriate care. Anna understood immediately. She had been expecting this. Rumors had circulated through the camp for days about the separation order, about children being removed, about mothers who would wake up one morning to find their babies gone. But expecting something and experiencing it proved vastly different. No, Anna said in heavily accented English. She pulled Elsa closer, the infant making small noises against her shoulder. She stays with me. She is my daughter. This is not negotiable, the social worker said, her tone suggesting she had delivered similar messages many times before. The child will receive better care in a proper home than in a detention facility. You should be grateful we're providing this option. I am her mother, Anna said, her voice rising. I feed her. I care for her. She needs me. The child will be placed with a family who can know. Anna backed toward the corner of the barrack, holding Elsa with both arms. Other women in the barrack had awakened, were watching with growing alarm, beginning to understand what was happening. Several moved toward Anna, forming an instinctive barrier between mother and authorities. Corporal Wheeler felt his stomach twist. He was 23 years old, from a small town in Tennessee, raised to respect authority and follow orders. But this order felt wrong in ways he couldn't articulate. He looked at the other guards, saw his own discomfort reflected in their faces. Ma'am, Wheeler said gently, we don't want this to be difficult. We're just following orders. Then don't follow them, Anna said, tears streaming down her face. Please, she is 6 months old. She needs her mother. Please don't take her from me. The social worker nodded to the guards. Proceed. Wheeler and the other guards moved forward reluctantly. The German women in the barrack tried to block them, voices rising in German and broken English, hands reaching out to prevent what was about to happen. But guards were trained. The women were not, and within 30 seconds the barrier broke. 2 guards held Anna's arms while Wheeler reached for the baby. Elsa, sensing the tension, began crying, a thin wailing that filled the barrack with sound. Anna fought against the hands holding her, screaming in German, then in English. No, please, don't take my baby. Don't take her. Wheeler lifted Elsa from Anna's arms as carefully as he could, trying to minimize the trauma, but there was no gentle way to tear an infant from her mother. The baby's cries intensified. Anna's screams turned into something beyond language, a sound of pure anguish that made every person in the barrack guard and prisoner alike feel complicit in something fundamentally wrong. They carried Elsa out of the barrack while Anna collapsed to the floor, still screaming, still reaching toward the door where her daughter had disappeared. The other women crowded around her, some crying themselves, some speaking urgently in German, trying to offer comfort where no comfort was possible. Outside, Wheeler handed the crying infant to the social worker, who placed her in a basket in the back seat of a waiting car. Elsa's wails continued, muffled now by the vehicle's windows, but still audible across the compound. Wheeler stood watching the car drive away, feeling something inside himself crack. He had followed orders. He had done his duty. But he couldn't shake the sound of Anna Weber's screams, couldn't stop seeing the look on her face as they pulled her daughter away. Anna Weber stopped speaking. For 3 days following Elsa's removal, she lay on her bunk in complete silence, neither eating nor drinking, responding to no one. The camp's medical staff tried to intervene. Captain Sullivan personally attempted to coax her into taking fluids, explaining that dehydration would lead to serious health complications. Anna's eyes tracked the doctor's movements, but her expression remained blank, empty, as if something essential had been extracted along with her daughter. On the second day, her breasts became engorged with milk that had nowhere to go. The physical pain of milk production without an infant to nurse created medical complications that required intervention. Captain Sullivan manually expressed the milk, working with clinical efficiency, while Anna lay unresponsive, tears running silently down her temples. "This is unconscionable," Sullivan told Colonel Hayes that evening. "That woman is experiencing profound trauma. Her body is producing milk for a baby that's been taken away. The physical pain is significant, but the psychological damage is catastrophic. We need to reverse this decision. I've contacted Army Command 3 times, Hayes said, the exhaustion evident in his voice. They maintain that the policy is appropriate and necessary. They've assured me the child is receiving excellent care with a qualified foster family. The child needs her mother, Sullivan said flatly, and the mother needs her child. This isn't about policy or logistics. This is about basic human decency. I agree with you, Hayes said quietly, but I don't have the authority to countermand orders from Washington. All I can do is continue requesting reconsideration. By the third day, the other prisoners in Anna's barrack had organized themselves into shiftswomen, sitting beside her bed, trying to coax her to drink water, speaking softly in German about hope and survival and the reunion that would come after the war. But their efforts produced minimal results. Anna accepted small sips of water only when her body's survival instinct overrode her psychological withdrawal. She said nothing. She engaged with nothing. She existed in a state of profound absence. The camp's atmosphere changed. The separation had been witnessed by dozens of prisoners, and news of it spread through the compound with the speed of shared outrage. Women who had previously accepted their detention with relative equanimity now seethed with quiet anger. The assumption that Americans treated prisoners humanely, that capture meant safety rather than cruelty, had been shattered by the image of guards tearing an infant from her screaming mother. On the 4th day, a prisoner named Marguerite Klein approached Corporal Wheeler during morning inspection. She was perhaps 40 years old, had taught English in Berlin before the war, and served as an informal translator for prisoners who struggled with the language. "Corporal Wheeler," she said quietly, "I need to speak with you, privately." Wheeler led her to a small office away from the main compound. Marguerite sat down carefully, choosing her words with precision. "What happened to Anna Weber was wrong," she said without preamble. "You know this. I saw your face when you carried the baby away. You know it was wrong." Wheeler said nothing. He couldn't argue. "The women in our compound are writing a formal protest," Marguerite continued. "We are addressing it to the Red Cross, to Army Command, to anyone who might listen. We are documenting what happened and requesting that Elsa be returned to her mother immediately. I don't think a protest will—" "We also want your testimony," Marguerite interrupted. "Your account of what you witnessed, your description of Anna's condition. You are an American soldier, a guard with direct knowledge of the situation. Your words will carry more weight than ours." Wheeler felt trapped between conflicting loyalties. He was a soldier. He followed orders. But he had also witnessed something that violated every instinct he possessed about right and wrong. "I could get in trouble," he said quietly, "for speaking against a direct order." "You are already in trouble," Marguerite said, her voice gentle but firm. Perhaps not officially, but morally. You participated in something cruel. You can choose to continue participating through silence, or you can try to correct it. That choice defines who you are. Wheeler stared at his hands for a long moment. Finally, "What do you need me to write?" The letter reached the International Red Cross office in Washington 6 days after the separation. It was remarkably comprehensive testimony from 23 prisoners who had witnessed the event. Medical documentation from Captain Sullivan about Anna's physical and psychological condition, and Wheeler's careful account of the orders he received and the scene that unfolded when those orders were implemented. The Red Cross representative assigned to review, it was Dr. Elizabeth Monroe, a 58-year-old physician who had spent 30 years working in humanitarian contexts. She read the letter twice, then immediately contacted Army Command requesting access to Fort Oglethorpe for an emergency inspection. The Army's response was defensive. The separation had been conducted according to proper protocols, they insisted. The child was receiving excellent care. The mother would be reunited with her daughter after the war. There were no grounds for an emergency inspection. Dr. Monroe pushed harder. She threatened to file a formal complaint with international oversight bodies, to notify journalists who covered POW treatment issues, to make the case a public scandal that would embarrass American detention operations. Finally, Army Command relented. She could conduct her inspection, but only after receiving proper clearance, only with appropriate military escort, only under conditions that ensured she didn't disrupt camp operations. She arrived at Fort Oglethorpe on November 28th, 2 weeks after Elsa's removal. Colonel Hayes met her at the gate with obvious apprehension. "Dr. Monroe," he said formally, "welcome to Fort Oglethorpe. I want to emphasize that this facility operates in full compliance with Geneva Convention standards. The incident you're investigating was conducted according to policy directives from—" "Show me the mother," Monroe interrupted. They brought her to Anna's barrack, where Anna lay on her bunk staring at the ceiling, barely responsive to external stimuli. Monroe conducted a brief examination, noting the signs of malnutrition, dehydration, and profound psychological trauma. She asked Anna simple questions in German. Anna's responses were monosyllabic when they came at all. "How long has she been like this?" Monroe asked Captain Sullivan. "Since the separation. 14 days. We're keeping her alive with forced fluids and minimal food, but she's deteriorating. Without intervention, I'm concerned about her long-term prognosis." Monroe made extensive notes. Then she interviewed other prisoners, documenting their accounts of the separation, their observations of Anna's condition, their concerns about the policy implications. Finally, she requested to see where the baby had been placed. The Hendersons lived 15 miles from Fort Oglethorpe in a farmhouse surrounded by cotton fields that stretched flat and endless to distant tree lines. Robert Henderson was 47, a farmer who had been rejected from military service due to a childhood injury that left him with a pronounced limp. His wife Martha was 42, a former schoolteacher who had lost their only child to scarlet fever in 1938. They had agreed to take Elsa as foster parents with genuinely good intentions. The social worker had explained that a German prisoner's baby needed temporary care, that the mother was detained and unable to provide proper childcare, that the Hendersons would be performing a charitable service by offering their home. Martha, still grieving the loss of her own child 6 years earlier, saw it as an opportunity to channel her maternal instincts towards something meaningful. But Elsa wouldn't stop crying. For 2 weeks, the baby wailed, almost constantly pausing only for exhausted sleep, then resuming her thin, persistent crying that filled the farmhouse with sound. Martha tried everything she knew: bottle feeding, rocking, singing, walking the floor at night, while Robert tried to sleep through the noise. The baby would accept formula grudgingly, would quiet briefly, then return to her distressed state. "She wants her mother," Martha said on the 10th day, her own exhaustion evident. "She's too young to understand what happened, but she knows something's wrong. She knows she's not where she's supposed to be. The social worker said she'd adjust, Robert said, though his tone suggested skepticism. She's not adjusting. She's suffering. Martha looked at the crying infant in her arms, her expression a mixture of compassion and helplessness. I thought we'd be helping, but I don't think we are. When Dr. Monroe arrived at the Henderson farmhouse with her military escort, Martha answered the door holding Elsa, who was in the middle of another crying episode. The baby's face was red and blotchy, her small body rigid with distress. I'm Dr. Monroe from the Red Cross, Monroe said. I'm conducting an investigation into the circumstances of this child's placement. May I come in? Martha led her inside, grateful to have someone official to speak with. She explained the past 2 weeks, the constant crying, the feeding difficulties, the sense that no amount of care or attention could console the infant. She needs her mother, Martha said simply. I've raised a child. I know the difference between normal infant fussiness and profound distress. This baby is traumatized. We've tried everything, but we're not what she needs. Monroe examined Elsa carefully, noting signs of weight loss, poor sleep patterns, the physical evidence of an infant in acute stress. She documented Martha's testimony, her observations about the baby's condition, her assessment that the current placement was harming rather than helping the child. Would you support returning the infant to her mother? Monroe asked. Yes, Martha said without hesitation. Immediately, I agreed to help a child, but keeping her away from her mother isn't helping. It's hurting her. Dr. Monroe returned to Washington and filed a comprehensive report documenting what she had found. A mother experiencing severe trauma from forced separation, an infant showing signs of failure to thrive despite adequate physical care, foster parents who recognized that the placement was harmful, and military personnel who acknowledged that following the separation order had violated basic principles of humane treatment. The report concluded with an unambiguous recommendation: reunite mother and child immediately, revise the policy that had caused the separation, and provide appropriate medical and psychological support to help both mother and infant recover from the trauma of separation. The Army's initial response was bureaucratic resistance. Policies existed for reasons, they argued. Reversing decisions created bad precedents. Individual cases couldn't dictate broader protocols. But Dr. Monroe had documented the case too thoroughly, had gathered too much testimony from too many credible sources. She had medical evidence, witness statements, even the support of the foster parents themselves. And she had made clear that if the Army didn't address the situation, she would take the case public to newspapers, to oversight committees, to anyone who would listen. 3 days after her report was filed, new orders arrived at Fort Oglethorpe. Elsa Weber was to be returned to her mother immediately. The separation policy was suspended pending comprehensive review, and Colonel Hayes was to ensure that mother and child received appropriate medical support during their reunification. Hayes received the orders with profound relief mixed with anger at the bureaucracy that had created the problem in the first place. He called Captain Sullivan to his office. Bring Anna Weber here, he said. Tell her we're bringing her daughter back. Anna didn't believe it at first. Captain Sullivan found her in the barrack, still lying on her bunk in the same withdrawn state she'd maintained for 2 weeks. When Sullivan explained that Elsa was being returned, that the separation order had been reversed, Anna's expression didn't change. She had retreated too far into protective numbness to risk hoping. But when the car arrived at the compound gate and Martha Henderson emerged carrying a crying infant, something shifted in Anna's blank expression. She sat up slowly, her body moving as if remembering how, her eyes focusing on the bundle in Martha's arms. They brought her to the medical office, where Martha waited holding Elsa. The baby was crying, that same persistent wail that had filled the Henderson farmhouse for 2 weeks. Martha looked exhausted, sad, relieved. I'm so sorry, Martha said quietly, though Anna couldn't understand the English words. I'm so sorry this happened to you. Anna stood in the doorway, staring at her daughter, her hands trembling. For a moment, she didn't move, as if afraid that moving would make the vision disappear, would prove this was another cruel dream. Then Martha extended the baby toward her, and Anna's body remembered what to do. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps and took Elsa in her arms. The baby's crying continued for perhaps 5 more seconds. Then, recognizing her mother's smell, her touch, her presence, Elsa went silent. The sudden absence of crying was so complete it felt like a physical change in air pressure. Anna collapsed into a chair, clutching her daughter, rocking slightly, making sounds that were part crying and part laughter and part something beyond language. Elsa pressed against her mother's chest, her small hands grasping at Anna's uniform, her body relaxing into the security she had been deprived of for 14 days. Everyone in the room was crying. Captain Sullivan, who had maintained professional detachment through 20 years of military medicine. Martha Henderson, who had tried so hard to help and felt so helpless. Corporal Wheeler, who stood near the door, remembering the morning he had pulled this same infant from these same arms. Anna began nursing Elsa immediately, the baby latching with desperate hunger. Anna's milk production had never fully stopped despite medical intervention to reduce it. Her body had refused to accept that her daughter was gone. Now, feeling the familiar pull of an infant nursing, her body responded with such relief it manifested as fresh tears. "Thank you," Anna whispered in broken English, looking up at Martha. "Thank you. Thank you." Martha knelt beside Anna's chair and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. She said nothing. There were no words adequate to the moment. She simply stayed there for several minutes, bearing witness to a reunion that should never have been necessary, sharing in the complicated mixture of joy and sorrow and recognition that something precious had been damaged, even though it was now being restored. Anna and Elsa remained in the medical wing for 3 days, while Captain Sullivan monitored their recovery. Anna's appetite returned gradually first, just whatever food could be eaten one-handed while holding Elsa. Then more substantial meals once she began trusting that her daughter wouldn't disappear again. The weight she had lost during the separation came back slowly, her body rebuilding itself. But the psychological recovery took longer. Anna experienced nightmares, waking suddenly in darkness, reaching for Elsa with panicked urgency, needing to feel the baby's warmth, to hear her breathing, to confirm she was still there. She became hypervigilant about guards entering the medical wing, tensing whenever anyone approached, positioning herself between Elsa and any potential threat. "She's exhibiting symptoms of acute trauma," Captain Sullivan explained to Colonel Hayes. The separation triggered something primitive in her, a fundamental violation of the mother-child bond. Even though Elsa is back, Anna's brain is still processing the experience as an ongoing threat. It will take time, and something else. Something the camp administration hadn't anticipated, but which emerged organically from the prisoner population itself. The other women organized themselves into a protective circle around Anna and Elsa. They took shifts sitting with Anna during the day, helping care for Elsa when Anna needed rest, creating a network of support that communicated a simple message. This would not happen again. If authorities tried to remove Elsa a second time, they would have to go through every woman in the compound. Colonel Hayes wisely chose not to challenge this arrangement. He had followed orders that proved disastrous. He had learned through painful experience that sometimes regulations created more problems than they solved. He issued quiet instructions to his guards. Leave the mother and child alone. Respect the protective barrier the other prisoners had established. Intervene only if genuine security threats emerged. Corporal Wheeler requested to be Anna's primary guard during her recovery period. Hayes approved, recognizing that Wheeler carried his own trauma from the separation and needed some form of reconciliation. Wheeler spent hours sitting outside the medical wing, not speaking much, just being present. On the 4th day, Anna approached him in the corridor. She held Elsa against her shoulder, the baby sleeping peacefully. "Thank you," Anna said quietly in her heavily accented English. "For the letter. I was told you wrote testimony. Helped bring her back." Wheeler looked uncomfortable. "I just wrote what happened. What I saw. You could have stayed silent. Many would have." Anna adjusted Elsa slightly, a gesture instinctive and protective. "You chose to speak. That matters." "I'm sorry," Wheeler said, the words coming out rough with emotion he hadn't expected to feel. "I'm sorry I took her from you in the first place. I was following orders, but that doesn't excuse?" Anna reached out and touched his arm briefly. "You brought her back," she said simply. "That is what I will remember. The policy that had separated Anna from Elsa was officially suspended on December 3, 1944, and formally abolished on January 15, 1945. A comprehensive review determined that forced separation of nursing mothers from their infants created unacceptable medical and psychological complications, that the supposed benefits of such policies were outweighed by demonstrable harms, and that future cases would be handled through individualized assessment rather than blanket directives. The review cited Dr. Monroe's investigation extensively, including testimony from Anna, from Captain Sullivan, from Martha Henderson, and from Corporal Wheeler. It became a case study in how well-intentioned policies could produce cruel outcomes when implemented without consideration for human complexity. Anna and Elsa remained at Fort Oglethorpe through the war's end. When repatriation procedures began in 1946, they were among the first groups processed priority given to mothers with young children. Recognition that prolonged detention created particular hardships for families. A return to a Germany that barely resembled the nation Anna had left. Her hometown in Bavaria was partially destroyed. Her family's apartment building was rubble. She found work as a nurse in a Red Cross clinic, using the medical training that had brought her to military service in the first place. She never married again. Never found confirmation of what happened to her husband, though the most likely explanation was the one she had been given in 1943, shot down over the Channel, lost. But she had Elsa, and Elsa grew up healthy, without apparent lasting damage from those 14 days of separation. Anna made certain of that, watching for signs of developmental problems, ensuring her daughter received adequate care, building a life focused on the one relationship that had survived the war intact. In 1962, Anna received a letter forwarded through veteran correspondence networks. It was from Martha Henderson, who had somehow tracked her down through international channels. "Dear Mrs. Weber, I have thought about you and Elsa many times over the years. I wanted you to know that I have never forgotten those 2 weeks or the day I returned your daughter to you. It remains one of the most painful experiences of my life, not because caring for Elsa was difficult, but because I understood I was participating in something wrong. I hope you and Elsa are well. I hope she has grown into a healthy young woman. I hope you have found peace after everything you experienced. I have never stopped believing that the greatest mistake of that time was the separation itself. But I take some comfort in knowing that it was corrected, that you got your daughter back, that the policy was changed so other mothers wouldn't experience what you experienced. With deepest respect, Martha Henderson." Anna kept the letter, one of the few pieces of correspondence she preserved from the war years. She showed it to Elsa years later, when her daughter was old enough to understand the story of those 14 days in 1944. "Were you angry?" Elsa asked after reading Martha's letter. "At the woman who took care of me?" "No," Anna said quietly. "She was trying to help. She didn't create the situation. She just found herself inside it, like all of us. And when she recognized it was wrong, she said so. That took courage." "What about the guard?" "The one who took me away?" Anna was silent for a moment, remembering Corporal Wheeler's face as he carried a crying infant out of the barrack, remembering his testimony that helped bring Elsa back, remembering his apology in the medical wing corridor. "He followed orders he shouldn't have followed," Anna said finally. But then he tried to correct his mistake. He wrote the truth about what happened, even though it could have caused problems for him. That matters more than the original error. Elsa processed this, turning Martha's letter over in her hands. "I don't remember any of it," she said. "The separation, the foster home, coming back to you. I was too young. I remember enough for both of us," Anna said. "And what I remember is this. People made a terrible decision. But then other people, Americans, Germans, the foster mother, the guard, the doctor who investigated, they all chose to correct that decision. They chose to see it as wrong and to act on that recognition. That capacity for correction, for choosing differently, that's what survived. That's what mattered." Corporal Wheeler returned to Tennessee after the war, worked as a high school teacher for 38 years, and never spoke publicly about his time at Fort Oglethorpe. But he kept a copy of the testimony he had written about Anna Weber's case, filed carefully with his other war documents. His daughter found it after his death in 1989 and asked her mother what it meant. "Your father did something he shouldn't have done," his widow explained. Then he tried to make it right. He always said that second part, trying to make it right, was the most important thing he ever did during the war. Dr. Monroe continued her humanitarian work for another 15 years, investigating detention conditions, advocating for policy changes, documenting cases where regulations produced unintended cruelties. In her memoirs, published in 1965, she wrote about the Fort Oglethorpe case with particular reflection. The separation of Anna Weber from her infant daughter represented a failure of imagination, the inability of policymakers to envision the human cost of seemingly reasonable regulations. But what happened afterward represented something more hopeful, the capacity of individuals at every level to recognize wrong and work to correct it. The foster mother who spoke truth about the placement's failures, the guard who testified despite potential consequences, the prisoners who organized support, the medical staff who documented harm, the administrators who ultimately chose to reverse course. That capacity for correction, for choosing differently when confronted with evidence of harm, represents civilization's best defense against its own worst impulses. Fort Oglethorpe closed as a detention facility in 1946. Its prisoners repatriated, its buildings converted to other uses or demolished entirely. The medical wing where Anna and Elsa were reunited was torn down in 1951. The space returned to open land. Nothing physical remained to mark where a mother had collapsed to the floor, screaming as her baby was carried away, or where that same mother had sat 3 weeks later nursing her returned daughter while everyone in the room cried with relief. But the policy changes persisted. The recognition that forced separation of nursing mothers from their infants caused unacceptable harm became embedded in detention protocols, influenced post-war conventions about prisoner treatment, shaped how future conflicts approached the question of families in detention contexts. The lesson, painful and necessary, survived even after the physical evidence disappeared, that sometimes following orders produces cruelty, that recognizing that cruelty and choosing to act against it defines character more than the original compliance, that the capacity to correct mistakes matters more than the fact mistakes were made. Anna Weber screamed as guards took her baby away. But then many people, from different positions, with different motivations, chose to bring that baby back, chose to admit the policy was wrong, chose correction over consistency. That choice, more than the original separation, defined what happened at Fort Oglethorpe in November 1944. Not the cruelty that regulations permitted, but the humanity that individuals insisted upon despite those regulations. The scream echoed, but so did the reunion. And in the end, both truths needed to be remembered, the wrong and the correction, the harm and the healing, the capacity for both cruelty and compassion that exists within any system composed of human beings making human choices.